Hello and welcome to episode 93 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. So today we're going to talk about interviewing people for software engineering jobs from both sides of that, being the interviewer and the interviewee. So I suppose let's start with some of the interviews that you lot have been through, the good, the bad, and the ugly of those.
I've had several good, several bad, and several ugly. Starting with just some of the good ones, I actually enjoy some of the take-home tests. Like there's a bunch of different standards out in the industry today. You have your take-home assignments, you have your live coding interviews, the dreaded whiteboard interviews where they ask you algorithm questions. And then sometimes it's just a chat with a hiring manager and you get the job or not. So those ones where it's just a chat with a hiring manager, although that sounds easier, I actually don't prefer those ones because I don't feel like you get a really good sense of the team that you'll be working with or the environment or even what the job's going to be like. So that's why the take-home interview is actually the one that or the take-home project is the one that I prefer. And most recently, I applied for and worked at a company where that was their standard. You did a full write-up on a design. You then went through a PR and merge process to have that design accepted. Then you would go through an implementation phase. They would go through another round of PR and review, and then that would eventually get accepted, and they'd have you make some changes along the way. And while it was a lot of work, it was exactly what we did day to day with the exact same people that we would work with day to day. And so it was really great because I got to see how the team interacts and what their review process was like and what the style of work would be like. So I really enjoyed that style of interviewing, whereas I don't like at all the quiz you on a whiteboard of what's this algorithm, what's that one.
I was just thinking about my worst interview experience, which was a phone interview with a well-known search engine company.
Ask Jeeves.
Yeah. And we got stuck, the interviewer and I, because there was a particular mathematical point that he needed me to figure out before he could move on. So it was a toy mathematical problem, not a programming problem. And I couldn't get the thing that he wanted me to get. And eventually we got there and there was this great sigh of relief, but it left me with this really bitter taste about partly what on earth has this got to do with the job, but also asking someone to have an insight. And that's the thing that makes you suitable for the job. Like when in that very stressful situation, it just seemed completely mad to me.
Yeah, I feel like in the industry today, you get quizzed on, can you recall this algorithm, or can you recall which algorithm is required to solve a particular problem? When, to me, the important part is, do you even know algorithms exist and to go look for one in these scenarios? Not, can you recall off the top of your head this exact one and use it right away? Like we have tech for that now. We have search engines. And if the standard is I have to recall it off the top of my head, well, that means I should actually remember every single algorithm and data structure out there without notice, which I don't think that's reasonable. And I don't know a single person that actually does that, even the genius level people that I've seen before.
That actually reminds me of an interview I did where I was on the other side of the desk and I was interviewing lots of people for a particular position, and it was a Java job. So we were doing kind of toy Java problems. And there was one problem in particular that almost every applicant decided the right way to solve this was using Java streams, which are like a slightly more advanced way of doing it that is a bit fancy schmancy. And you could tell the good applicants because they got partway into it and then they were like, this is too hard, I'm going to do it with a for loop. And then it was actually it was a problem that was very easy and good to solve with a for loop if you just stop trying to be fancy. So actually that was quite an interesting experience to notice people kind of being able to stop themselves and say, actually, I'm getting tangled up here.
Well, I wonder how much too that plays with the interviewer, because there's times where I want to put my best foot forward. I want to show the best code that I can write, or I want to show that I know how to do a particular thing. However, that interviewer, I'm sure, has something that they're looking for in order to say, yes, this person can code, or no, they can't. And finding that alignment between the two parties without verbally saying, hey, do you want me to just get this done real quick? Or do you want me to show you all the fancy things that I can do? Like that's a hard thing. And we don't have a good way to verbalize that between the interviewer and interviewee right now without just some back and forth, some honest back and forth.
In that situation, and also in lots of other situations, I always really try and set the scene of we're not trying to trick you. We're looking for you to kind of show what you can do. And in that particular problem, we would always say, we don't want fancy code. We just want to see that you can solve the kind of basic problem. But most people still followed that pattern of trying the fancy way first.
Amrith, am I right in thinking that you've never actually had to do an interview as the interviewee, but you've actually interviewed potential candidates?
Correct. I've never actually I've never gone through any kind of programming interview. My first programming job was, hey, I don't know Python. I know you're looking for a Python programmer. I'm happy to learn it. And they said, okay, cool. You're hired. And then that's how I learned Python.
You must have a very nice face.
It was not the smoothest onboarding process because I was just fumbling my way around trying to figure out what I was doing. Because up until then, I had only ever written Java and Go. And Java and Python, in my mind at least, are very different programming languages in like every respect. So it was very foreign. And then after I'd been with that company for a couple years, the owner asked me to start helping with interviews, coming up with an interview question like a take-home problem, and sitting in on those interviews and listening to the back and forth between the owner and the applicant, asking my own clarification questions and that kind of stuff.
So did you guys develop a rubric then, like a hard rubric for your interviews, or was it more loose, or did you give the applicants a choice of take-home questions, or how did you do that?
It was very loose, and the questions we came up with, we tried to design them to be very similar to actual problems we were trying to solve for our clients. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, aside from maybe working with AWS's Lambdas, right? Write something that runs in a Lambda that does a thing that interacts with an S3 bucket. And we would pay them for the time they spent on it because the code they were using, we could then reference to solve that problem. If, we thought it was good, they have done some of our work for us. And if it was not good and they didn't end up being a good fit, we still paid them for their time.
So I've heard some controversial takes on that style before, whether or not you not only do a take-home assignment or not, but whether or not that take-home assignment is actual work for the company and whether or not it's paid or not. It sounds like you did pay them for their time and it was an actual problem that the company was having. But did you ever run into like people coming back and saying like, hey, what's the market value? Like, what am I being paid? Or are you guys just having us solve your problems for the cheap?
No. All of the applicants went along with it fine, came up with solutions.
How many of those solutions did you end up using in the final products? And I know you may not have just like copy and pasted, right? Mm-hmm. But how many of those did you actually end up using? Did you find that useful as a company, or?
Out of maybe the 4 or 5 I sat in on and helped with, we maybe used 2 of the solutions. Or not used, but referenced architecturally and design-wise and re-implemented.
Interesting. And then I also wonder, out of the applicants that you either did or did, maybe an offer was given to them, maybe they did accepted it or not, but was there applicants that you gave an offer to, were you more likely to use their product in your code base, or was there any sort of correlation between the applicants you gave an offer to and also used their code?
A correlation, yes, but I don't know that it's necessarily causation either, because out of all the interviews I sat in on, we only didn't hire one person. Wow. And that was because we just didn't think they were a really good fit at all. Everyone else, even when their solutions weren't great, we still hired them because they were someone else who could churn out code.
I feel really cautious about this approach. It's ripe for abuse, like underpaying people, basically.
Right.
But also, so many of the problems we're working on involve so much context that even if you pay them for the time they spend, in order to get up to speed, maybe they had to spend hours and hours of other time, or maybe it's just impossible for them to contribute.
Our approach was, say, maybe spend up to 10 hours on this. And that's your budget for this take-home problem. You can spend all that time or none of that time. It's up to you. And what we would pay them is exactly the same rate that we would pay them if we were to hire them.
But my experience is that as an applicant, I spent more time than they said you were supposed to spend on take-home tests.
I see.
Yeah, how do you know as the interviewer whether they have gone away and spent all day, every day for the last week on it versus just a couple of hours on it? I suppose there's no way to know that, is there?
unless you install some sort of tracking software on their machine, no, there's no real way to verify that they have spent the time they said they spent on it.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I think that in-person or live interviewing has got to be part of the mix of a system like this, because we did take-home tests and people sent in brilliant solutions. And if they're really, really long, then obviously you can tell that it took a long time. But they might have just been honed into this beautiful diamond over a very long time and you just wouldn't know.
That's why I like the way that this previous company that I worked for did it, where they would have a problem for you, you would propose a solution, and then they would change little bits of it live during the review that would kind of force you to have to go back and make some subtle tweaks to it. And what that allowed you to do, though, was there were certain things that if they'd honed in a particular direction too much, asking them to make these different tweaks once or twice after that, you could pretty quickly see, are they going to take another day or two before getting back to you, or are they going to make a quick change to it and, push up the commit and tell you it's good to go? So that was kind of a good way to get a judge of how long they're spending on this. But yeah, even there were a few interviews that I sat in as the interviewer for those ones. And even then we would tell people, don't spend more than a few hours on this. And who knows, people could have spent a week on it for all we knew.
I do like that idea of asking people to change a thing they've already been working on, because I think one of the real challenges of interviewing is you're judging how someone jumps into a new situation, which isn't their main job most of the time. Most of the time it's actually working in an environment they're very familiar in and they have a lot of context. So by giving them a piece of work that they've already worked on and invested in, and then saying, let's make a change to that thing, you're seeing how they react to having much more context.
Yeah. And interestingly, there were several people that noped out right away. As soon as we'd say make a change, they'd be like, absolutely not. This is a waste of my time, which to me would probably say that they either spent a lot more time on this or maybe they had somebody else help them. I don't know. But then there are other people that were super gracious and turned something around real quickly. And those people were usually a joy to work with.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Kolide. What do you call an endpoint security product that works perfectly but makes users miserable? A failure. The old approach to endpoint security is to lock down employee devices and roll out changes through forced restarts, but it just doesn't work. IT is miserable because they've got a mountain of support tickets, employees start using personal devices to get their work done, and executives opt out the first time it makes them late for a meeting. You can't have a successful security implementation unless you work with end users. That's where Kolide comes in. Their user-first device trust solution notifies users as soon as it detects an issue on their device and teaches them how to solve it without needing help from IT. That way, untrusted devices are blocked from authenticating, but users don't stay blocked. Kolide is designed for companies with Okta, and it works on macOS, Windows, Linux, and mobile devices. So if you have Okta and you're looking for a device trust solution that respects your team, support the show and go to kolide.com/LinuxDevTime to watch a demo and see how it works. That's KOLIDE.com/LinuxDevTime. Quick bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to linuxdevtime.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And you also get quite a lot of episodes a day or so early. And if you want to get in contact with us, you can email show@linuxdevtime.com. So as an interviewer, surely it's not just about the technical skills. It's about how that person is going to fit into the culture of the company and whether they have interpersonal skills. To what extent does that form a part of the interview process?
I think that's a pretty big part of it. And that's why I liked that interview process from that previous company was the design section up front. One, that's how we operated. You had to put up a design proposal in written prose and then communicate that to your team and fight for your position. And that's what this design document did in the interview process. It allowed us to see, can they put together a coherent and articulate design of something? And can they communicate and fight for their position, especially when we would then challenge their architecture design in some way or another and see how they respond to that. Some people respond hostily. Some people respond great and say like, oh, I didn't think about that. Let me update my document. So it was a really good way, because the last thing you want is after the hire to then push back on somebody's idea and for them to fall apart at a small disagreement.
Surely what you do is you get on the call with them and then you just demand to know who they voted for.
Or whether or not they believe in God.
Yeah. The key questions, like I ask all potential co-hosts.
I do think, Joe, that is the hardest part because it's absolutely critical how someone, you could say fits in, although I think that's probably not the right phrase, but how someone is going to work with the team. But at the same time, it's also the place where your own biases are just at their most powerful, and it's going to be so easy to pick someone that you like for some reason that's completely irrelevant to the job. I mean, apart from the fact that just being unfair and bad, that's also going to leave you with a team that doesn't have the kind of richness that you'd like to have of people with different approaches and different styles. So it's really hard. One of the ways that I want to try and avoid that bias is by trying to be really consistent about the questions that I ask and the way that I ask them and the context that I give to people. Because it's so easy as an interviewer, if you like someone, to just subconsciously give them little non-verbal hints or little verbal hints that just make everything a bit easier for them than for the person you're not getting on with. So trying to be consistent, which is really, really hard, I think is really important.
And some people are just really good at interviewing.
Yeah.
They're very personable. They talk really nice and they're just very agreeable. So sussing that out is also difficult.
Yeah.
But I think very important to the team dynamic.
Yeah, like when you talk to me and I just come across as really friendly and not at all like a cynical bastard.
When I started out, my first interview didn't involve writing any code at all. It just involved people kind of getting a general impression of me. And what you just said, Kevin, is absolutely the reason why that is such a terrible idea. Because if you sit someone down and say, write a program, even the most simple program ever, then in certain circumstances, you'll filter out like 50% of the applicants because it turns out they can't do that.
That's where FizzBuzz came from, right? I'm curious too, Amalith or Andy, any of the people that you've hired, have they turned out to be bad fits, or maybe the interview process wasn't exactly perfect and, they ended up having to be let go?
For my very small sample size, there was one person or two people we ended up letting go later on. But I personally disagree with that decision. I thought they were okay fits. I thought it was more personality clashes with the guy who owned the company.
So we had one person on our team who's a really nice person. I wasn't actually involved in hiring, but I knew very closely the people who were, and they felt it was a mistake. Really nice person, able to get other people to help with the work, but basically couldn't do the work themselves. So it ended up just getting help from one person, then the next person, then the next person. Really sad situation, dragged on for ages, and it really demonstrated to me how important the interview process is, but especially how important the probation period is, because actually it was clear during the probation period and action wasn't taken at that point. So I think that's a really critical part as well.
I wonder if the software engineering interviews of today bias towards a certain age demographic. My personal opinion is that most interviews of today do tend to bias towards a younger audience, potentially someone that is just out of university recently, or perhaps doesn't have children or more time on their hands, nights and weekends, a bunch of open source projects, that sort of thing. And a lot of the interviewing processes don't bias towards someone who has a full-time job already and potentially a wife and children. And
Amalith, as the token young person, what do you think?
I don't know. I've never gone through an interview.
You've always just blagged jobs, as we would say in the UK. You've just sort of used your charm to get various jobs.
I see.
So I do think that's the case, Kevin, definitely. And as someone who's getting older, that worries me slightly. But we spent some time at one place I worked looking into how we could hire people who are coming back after having children and things like that, and how to make the interview process work for someone like that, especially someone who feels rusty and isn't going to be like lightning fast on the answer and isn't going to know the latest trends in the technology, but is going to bring a bit of wisdom, but also just like a lot of pragmatic and well-rounded skills, but aren't going to be like blowing you away with everything they know or every really fast insight they have in an interview.
Yeah, that or have 20 different open source projects that they contribute to on the weekends. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or have time to do a take-home test.
That's a big one.
Yeah, I can definitely see how they're biased towards younger people because, as you said, they might not have time for those take-home tests. They might not be able to take a whole day off to go work at the place for that probationary period or whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I would say Well, certainly if you're someone like me, who's like a middle-aged white man, you need to get advice from people who are different from you. If you're going to figure out all of that stuff, you're not just going to figure it out by trying to imagine what it's like to be a full-time parent or be working 2 jobs or to have not written any software for 4 years. You need a bit of help from people with different perspectives to sort out your interview process. Maybe even battle test it, try it, run it through.
Actually, I think that's a huge point right there. Just having a very diverse interviewing crew is super critical. And that's a great point.
And really hard to do. If you're trying to change your organization to be more diverse, that means you're not very diverse. How do you bootstrap that process? Maybe you need to pay someone.
Well, we'd better wrap it up. Do let us know your experiences of being the interviewer or the interviewee. You can email us show@linuxdevtime.com. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.